I am running this meeting at the beginning of the meeting because I'm the vice chair of the AOS board. And so there is the attendance sheet is making its way around. If you can put whether you're voting or not. And if you know that somebody isn't here from your group, can you just write not attending on it as well? And so we're at number 3 on the agenda, which is nomination and election of the AOS board chair. Do we have any nominations for candidates?
So call to order, yes. For the board chair,
Hi,
yeah, I'd like to nominate Jessica.
okay. Is there any other nominations?
Just clarify with Jessica, please.
Oh.
I don't want it.
That is very funny.
Jessica, so
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You can get it whether you like it or not.
That's funny. Okay, I don't see any other nominations. Jessica, are you willing? Yes, thank you. From the bottom of our hearts. So we have a nomination and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Who seconded this?
Any opposed? Okay, I'm now turning the meeting over to the new board chair.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Yes.
So the DocuSign that went around, I know I saw it today or yesterday, hopefully everyone signed it, and I believe, I know that there is one that Ingrid has entered from her, I'm gonna read something that's been entered into public comment, and maybe is there other public comment? Any public comment? So read this into the record.
Okay, this is a letter dated September 10, 2021, Superintendent Gauss and Lely. Effective immediately, I am submitting my resignation from the Bar Harbor School Committee. I regret terminating my service prior to the end of my current term, but I can no longer participate in the gamesmanship the Teachers Association and their union representatives are playing. The prohibitive practice complaint filed by the Teachers Association, which accuses me and my fellow school board volunteers of multiple labor violations, is malicious and misrepresents the facts. I joined the school board 8 years ago to be an advocate for teachers and students, and every action and decision I have made has been from that position. Based on the actions of the Teacher Association and their union representative, I feel that I can no longer serve in the manner I had intended. This process has begun to negatively affect my mental health and the quality of my family life. I also fear this process will negatively affect my children's school experience. It is imperative that I put my family and my health above my service to this community. Sincerely, Christina Lasquadro. So I would just like to add, and I'm sure I'm speaking for all school board members, that our school system has just lost one of our most dedicated members. Christy has worked tirelessly during her tenure to advocate for our schools, students, teachers, and staff, and it's a real shame that this has happened. I'm assuming some of you have some questions about all of this, and we'll be answering those questions during executive session at the end of this meeting when we go into executive session to discuss contract negotiations.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'll just check again. I don't see any other public comment. Okay. So our next item is approval of minutes from 16 August 2021.
Didn't we meet in the auditorium at the library?
Thank you. I'll move approval.
Okay, is there a second?
second.
Any discussion of the minutes?
Just removing that, is it with that
Yes,
correction?
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes with that correction?
Am I voting or no?
You are. Okay. That brings us to the board workshop with Melissa Huey, who is.
You're on, yes. Go front and center. Josh is ready to go. Presentation. Josh, you all set?
Melissa, if you'd rather be somewhere else, I can.
I'm good with whatever, you know, I mean, I don't want to be right in front of the television. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
About turning off the stand so you can hear a little better.
You know, we could do, instead of putting this up, you guys all have this in front of you, right? So why don't you pretend you're looking at it, and then that'll be even more fun.
It'll be good for the live stream.
What, if this is on?
Yeah.
Okay. So, good evening, everybody. My name's Melissa Huey. I'm a lawyer at Jerome and Woodson. I'm gonna try not to be, I'm gonna try not to talk too fast, but I'm gonna try not to take too much of your time. So I want to just start by saying that I know, because of my job, that there is no harder thing right now than to be involved in education. From teachers to administrators to school board members, this is the hardest thing that anyone can do because it's so important and there are so many different views and there's no right answer. And so what you're doing now is just, I mean, it's impossible. And it's great that you're doing it, but you're going to hit some contentious times. And so what I'm going to be talking about tonight for not too long is some ways that you as board members can sort of navigate those contentious times. But I think really what it comes down to is ultimately getting the support of your community. If people think that you run your district well, they will ultimately trust you, even if they don't agree with you. And if they trust you, even if they don't agree with you, you're gonna be able to make things work out. So that's some of the things we're gonna be talking about tonight. So I usually like to start. Let's jump two ahead. With some language of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court back in 1924. And a case called Shaw versus Small, which actually dealt with an expulsion of a student. The Supreme Court said a school committee acts as a public board. It in no sense represents the town. Its members are chosen by voters of the town, but after election, they are public officers deriving their authority from the law and responsible to the state for the good faith and rectitude of their acts. So what that says basically is that once you are elected as a school board member, you're no longer like you were as a candidate, reaching out to the people that are in the district that elects you. You sort of take off that candidate and put on your sort of cloak as school board member. That's a really important concept for, do I have any lawyers here? Well, just in case I did, I will tell you that that is not the holding of the Shaw versus Small case. So it's not the specific law of the state of Maine, but it's language that's important. And we have the next slide now. And a couple of years ago, that concept that you aren't representing your constituents, but you're representing the whole school, the legislature, some people tried to overturn that by a statute that said school board member is accountable to the residents who live within the boundaries of the board's district. who are the school board's constituents. That law did not pass. So what that really means is that that language that we talked about, that I just mentioned in Shaw versus Small, it's really that I think sort of the law of the state of Maine. So does that mean that it doesn't matter who elected you, or you don't have to listen to the community? Of course not. What I said before is that what we're talking about here is building the confidence of all of your constituents. So who are your constituents? Certainly they're students. But also, and let's go a couple more, maybe. You've got employees. If you don't have the support of those constituents, you can't get people to work here. So you need them, their constituents as well. So are parents, guardians, and community members. If you don't have their support, you don't get your budget passed, you don't get people to volunteer in the school, and you don't get the support that makes the schools in this community really as outstanding as they are. So that's really what we're talking about here. Next slide. So when we talk about the obligations of a school committee or a school board, there are really two places that we find them in law. One is the statutes, the main law, and the other are school committee or school board policy. So I guess my next slide says, is there a difference and does it matter? And the answer to that is there is a difference. The law is something that you absolutely have to follow because it's the law. Policies are something that you can, because they're your law, change. You don't want to ever suspend a policy except when absolutely necessary, because a policy is really the law that you've all decided is going to govern your school boards, I guess I should say. And so if you're expecting your employees to follow your policies, and you're expecting your students to follow your policies, it's really, really important that you as a board follow your policies. That sounds easy, but you have a lot of them. So one of the things that means is that you really have to know what your policies say. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a couple of them. And I just want to stress that those policies are really, although they're not statute, they're your laws. So in terms of the statute, the main law provides really three different roles for school board members. First, you're a legislative body and a policy maker. So what you're doing is adopting policies. And there's some that are required in the law: non-discriminatory hiring, safeguard against communicable disease. I put that in there because I don't know, it seems kind of wrong. Bomb threats, staff bullying, etc., etc. You're also responsible for adopting a budget, adopting a course of study in alignment with learning results, and adopting student code of conduct, emergency response, etc., etc. So you guys all make the law for your various districts. That's something you know, that makes sense. Number two, you're a judicial body. So if there's a student expulsion or a teacher dismissal or a principal dismissal or something like that, you are the people who have to basically sit in judgment of that and make the ultimate decision. That's important because in order to be able to do that, if you ever do have to do it, you have to be impartial. So we know that you don't get a juror who's the aunt of the defendant or something like that. Either you would want to put the defendant away or they wouldn't, but they have an opinion if they're the aunt, I guess. So what that means, though, is that if there is a major personnel issue or a major student issue in the school, you're going to find that your administrators are saying, we can't say anything. And sometimes boards sort of get chafed at that. They get they're wondering, we're in charge of the school. Why aren't they telling us what's going on? Well, the reason they're not telling you is not because they want to hide stuff, but because they want to make it so that you can do your job as a judicial body. Last thing is, school board is an employer. So the statute says that you are in charge of selecting and hiring the superintendent. That is your only employee. You've probably heard that before. It's hard to kind of get your mind around that you're in charge of the school, but that guy right there is the only employee that you have. You're also responsible for accepting or not the nominations of teachers. The statute says superintendent nominates, school board accepts, and then superintendent hires. And for eliminating teacher positions, etc. So I've been talking a lot. Does anybody have any questions? I forgot to say, jump in. I promise I won't be any longer. If you have questions. Yes.
I'm not entirely sure it's like the right question to ask, but in the beginning, you were talking about how we operate as a school board, and there's a lot of trust involved in from everybody's perspective. And we're in a tough moment right now. How do you create that or build it back from a place that has been hurt?
So there's no one answer and there's no easy answer, I would say. But I think that one thing that's really important is following the process that you've set up. So as we talk about that, and actually, can we just jump to a different slide? So let's go to slide 27. Making your school committee operate effectively. And I think that what we're talking about here and what you're asking about is how do we make things work effectively?
He's looking at the page, Melissa. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're talking about is how do you work effectively, right? And how do you make people believe that you work effectively? And that is really working as a team. I think that's number one. So what I say here is it all starts with what it means to be a school committee. You are the governing body of the school. You are part of a team, and you have a duty of loyalty to students, employees, fellow students, school board members. Where the guidance you will find, I think, is in your own policy, BCA, which is the School Board Code of Ethics. I think that every school board member in this room should take that guide, print it out, and laminate it, because it really does give you all the answers you need to know. So it's got 3 themes. You do what's right for students. You work well together, and you honor the appropriate process and be professional. If people in the community can see you doing those things, that really starts to help build the trust that we need to do. You're doing it. So now let's let people see you do it. I think that's really where we go. So first, next slide. Do what's right for kids. So you find that in B. I will at all times think of children first and base my decisions on how they will affect children, their education and their training. So think about that. If you do that, and if people accept that that's what you're doing, then that's going to lead them to have more faith in what you're doing. Same thing with F. I will seek to provide education for all children in the community, commensurate with their needs and abilities. Absolutely makes sense. That talks about what Shaw versus Small says you want to do. And that's in your policy. So that's a good thing to do. Then you look to work well together and be kind. And this is really important. And this is, I don't know that you're not that way, so I'm not lecturing you, I promise. But I do know that when people get into stressful positions, when people disagree, there tends to be a lot more friction. And that's when we need to go back and remind ourselves of how important it is. And how you've agreed, I will make no disparaging remarks in or out of school committee meetings about others. That's important because that shows that you're all respecting each other's opinions. And that's what you want the community to do for you. Respect everybody's opinions, and then that lets you respect the process. I will support a decision graciously once it has been made by the majority of the school committee. That's a hard thing to do. Absolutely critical part of your rules. And if people see you doing that, then again, that builds confidence. I will make decisions openly after all facts bearing on a question have been presented and discussed. So that's another important thing. What I would have talked about if I hadn't skipped ahead is the Freedom of Access Act and how important that is. How important it is for people to be able to see you discussing things in public. Know that each one of you is hearing the same information, thinking about it, considering it, and coming up with something. That, again, leads to public confidence. I will make decisions openly. Oh, we just read that. Okay, so the last one, and I'm going to have to turn around because it's too small for me to read with my old eyes. I will remember at all times that as an individual, I have no legal authority outside the meetings of the school committee, and I will conduct my relationship with the school staff, the local citizenry, and all media of communications on the basis of that fact. So this is something that in my experience is super hard to do. You're all from communities who recognize you as school board members. They want to talk to you about, I'm guessing, they want to talk to you about school board stuff. They want to know what you're thinking. They want to get into a communication about that. And that's where you start to act as if you're a school committee member when you're talking individually. And it's important not to do that. It's important to remember that when you're at the grocery store or at a fair or walking down the street or something, you're just a person. It's only when you're in this room or the other rooms where you have your meetings that you are actually a part of the school committee. Make sense? Yeah. Either that or everybody just wants me to move on. I will recognize that my responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see that they are well operated. This is another thing that's really hard. We jumped ahead, as I said, but one of the things we can talk about is that whereas the statutes, the main law says that you're responsible for policy, it's the superintendent and below him, the administration that's responsible for running the school. They're the people that went to graduate school and learned how to do it, right? Or at least most of you. And they're the people who are responsible for the nuts and bolts. As board members, you are not. And you can't be, because if you get into the nuts and bolts, then A, you're not doing the job that you're supposed to do, that the Maine legislature has established for you, that your own policies have established for you. But B, you don't have like the whole, you don't have a view of everything. So that if you get involved in one or two little issues, that's where you get in trouble. That's where you're saying to the public, I'm gonna meddle where I shouldn't be doing, or I'm gonna be violating my own policy. And that's where, again, you start losing confidence. So I will listen to all citizens, but will refer all complaints to the proper authorities, and will discuss such complaints only at regular meetings after failure of administrative solution. this is another thing I think is really hard about being a school board. People want to talk to you about their problems. You know, I mean, what's the point of having a neighbor who's on the school committee unless you can talk to them about their problems, right? And then you want to help because it's your neighbor or your sister or the person down the road. But the thing here, though, is to remember that there is a process. You can listen. You should listen. You can push people to where they should go. You should be talking to the building principal. You should be talking to the special ed director. You should be talking to the superintendent, but not, okay, I'll handle this for you. Because if you handle it, it's just like it would be at any job that you work with. You know that if people can go around you to get to someone at the top, that cuts the legs right out. You don't want to do that for these people. You want to give them the authority to do their job and to work as a team with their folks. And if you are trying to go over their head, it doesn't work. So I feel like I'm lecturing, and I don't mean to, because I'm sure that you probably don't do all these things, but I know, based on practicing law for a long time, that there are people that do, and I understand it, because as I said, you want to be receptive to the people you work with. Questions? Anybody?
I just have a question about G. Is there like a best practices as it relates to the feedback loops in that process? Because that requires, your point, someone comes to the board room and they say, whatever, we push that, say you should talk to superintendent, talk to the principal, talk to the special ed director, whatever it is. What's the best practices for that feedback loop to come back to either the board or whomever that was handled? Because to your point, we would then only bring up such complaints if there was a failure of administrative solution, but in absence of some feedback, we don't know that there was ever a solution, except for the community member coming back to us and noggin to say, no one responded to me.
Right. And
whatever it is.
sometimes when they say no one responded to you, they mean no one responded to me in the way I like. And
Of course, so
sometimes
what's
they
the-
mean no one responded to me. And what you're saying is, how do I know that this is working out?
Right, is there a report of, included in the administrative reports that we get at board meetings? We had this much feedback to consider. There's in absence of any feedback, there's no way for us to know what the response was to any complaints or issues, right?
So I think it's more of a check. So you're saying, I come to you and I said, I have this terrible problem with my daughter, my third grade daughter's teacher, and she ought to be fired. And no, actually, someone ought to run over her with a bus or whatever. So you say, well, you need to talk to the principal. So now maybe you're going to tell the superintendent, I directed someone to talk to the principal about this person. Superintendent or principal is just going to give you a call and say, I'm on. So it's kind of everybody's talking to people, but they're not. You're saying, you do your job. They say, okay, I'm on. If you talk about it in the board meeting, you say, we got 10 complaints today or this month, and they were all dealt with. That's going to sound, it's going to make it sound like people are complaining all the time when they really aren't. I think it should be more of a organic kind of communication. Does that make sense?
Sure. And just to follow up on that, again, on best practices from a legal perspective, when people have written in complaints, this might be a written or unwritten policy, but the policy seems to be to respond to that verbally, so in phone calls, and not to put things in writing. From your perspective, is that the best practices as it relates to, because it would, there's been a couple situations where that's created some he said, she said issues versus if things are in writing, it's very clear what the message is. So, in responding to specific parental or other requests that come in writing, is the best to answer those verbally or in writing.
So if it's a complaint that comes in writing, it probably falls under one of your board complaint policies.
Not to me, I'm saying to the
No,
administration.
but I'm saying if it's a complaint that comes in writing,
Mhm.
it probably falls under a complaint procedure that the board has adopted.
Got it.
And then they're going to be following the procedure that's set forth in that. Oral complaint, it probably doesn't, and they may be pushing people towards the complaint procedure, or it may be something that they can just deal with like that. And it's sort of a judgment thing that.
So it would be up to the board to determine if we establish that if complaints are written, that the response should be then in writing, just so there's no miscommunication about what the actual response is. That would be a board decision to clarify what that communication.
No, I
procedure is.
think that you already have those policies, is what I'm saying.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have complaint policies that say if the complaint is in writing, here's what we're gonna do.
It's policy KUB.
KB is community members, and then you have ACAA and ACAB.
Just to
related
clarify,
complaints
does that
against
say
students.
that if it's in writing, the response needs to be in writing?
No, it says if there's a formal complaint that's in writing, here's what we do. And one of the things is provide a writing. So, yeah, in substance, it says that, although it says it in different ways.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, I will not criticize employees publicly, but will make such criticism to the superintendent for investigation and action. That's obviously really important for your employees, for the fairness of people who work in school. It's also just important again for the process, and I will honor school committee business that is confidential. Again, something that's super hard. But you also all have to remember you've got student information, you've got employee information, both of which is confidential under the law and really important. So how am I doing on time?
8:02.
What?
It's 8:06.
It says it's 4:09. That's I just gotta say.
It's never.
Okay, so let's pop back. We talked about what the school committee roles are. We talked a little bit about the powers and duties of the superintendent, which is responsible for the ongoing administration of the SAU and for ensuring operation of the school conforms to policies and rules adopted by the school board and laws, state laws and rules. So again, that's where we have school board on top, making the decisions, and the superintendent's responsible for those day-to-day things. I also have one quick slide in here. If you could go to slide 10. Or not. How about you guys go to slide 10? So rule policy BDB that I think is important to keep in mind. It's the role of the board chair. At least somebody should keep it in mind. Congratulations, by the way. So the board chair is responsible for, among other things, but these are the important things that I just wanted to highlight. Consult with the superintendent and planning the board meeting. Conferring with the superintendent on crucial matters that may occur between board minutes, and being the public spokesperson for the board at all times, except as responsibility is specifically delegated to others. So I bring those three things out for a couple of weeks. The first is that you can see that board chairs, and I'm assuming there are a number of you in this room, have a special role on the board that is more communication with the superintendent. There are times when board members who aren't board chairs get the impression that the board chair is too buddy-buddy with the superintendent, and that leads to some distrust. So I think it's just important to point out here that buddy-buddiness isn't that they're celebrating holidays together. It just means that they have certain roles that the others of you are lucky enough not to have. That's number one. And number two is that piece of being the public spokesperson for the board. And that's a really important thing to make sure that, especially when we're navigating in contentious times, that only one person is speaking for the board. I've seen, and I haven't seen it here, but I've seen around the state where there have been contentious issues like wearing masks or vaccines or back to school, remote, non-remote, where we've had different people on the board saying different things. Maybe they're saying different things to a bunch of reporters, or they're writing letters to the newspaper or things like that. That's really problematic because now the public doesn't know whether you guys know what you're doing. So having one spokesperson always is really, really important. Okay,
Can I ask a question?
yes.
How does that relate to committees? Should chairs be keeping track of all the committees in their board that they're running, or does that then become what you're saying about giving responsibility, delegating it to others?
So it could be that the board chair will say, okay, committee chairs, you're going to speak for the policy committee and you're going to speak. Or it could be, and some boards decide the policy committee chair is going to talk to the chair, and then we're going to work out who's going to speak for who. But just as long as you have an understanding as a group how that's going to be and who's going to be speaking, it's any way you choose to do it, it's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Quickly on conflicts of interest. There are legal requirements that you can't be employed by the school department. You can't engage in certain volunteer activities. You can't contract with the school department except under certain circumstances, or participate in matters in which you have personal interest. More importantly, though, what your policy says is, in order to future the mission of the schools, to meet the school unit's obligations under applicable law, and to promote public confidence in the schools, school board members should not permit financial interests or family allegiances to influence improperly the performance of their duties. This policy is intended to prevent the occurrence of real or apparent conflict of interest that may impair the mission and reputation of the school. So what we're talking about here, not only is an actual conflict of interest, but we're talking about the appearance. And again, this is all about confidence, about making people know that you are considering the information that you need to do and making that decision based on the best interest of kids, not the best interest of you. So quickly on the Freedom of Access Act, because I promised I would talk about
Can I
it.
just
Yes.
ask a quick question? It was really earlier. One thing that's arisen a number of times is that, you know, when people come and make public comment for all the right and important reasons that we know, we don't respond to them. Right, but sometimes we want people to know that we've heard them, like there is some kind of a response to the thing that they brought up, so that they're like a proper channel for addressing the concerns that were brought to the public comment and letting the person know that we responded. If we don't respond in that moment, I mean, that's their one.
So, just so I understand, you have public comment towards the beginning of your agenda.
Right,
People get up and they say stuff.
right,
You don't engage in a back and forth with them.
yes.
Thank you. But you don't want people to think that you're like not listening to them. And so I think,
If they have a concern that we can address it, I want them to know that we've addressed it, or, you know, it depends on the circumstance. Sometimes they're just telling something, there's nothing to address, but other times it might be something that there is a resolution to it, and we have to let them know that was resolved or was.
so it seems that if you're small enough so that if there is a resolution, they're probably going to know that, aren't they? I mean, I think at the end of any public comment, a nice practice to do is, I want to thank everybody here who's spoken here tonight. The board has heard you, and we're going to behave, act accordingly or something. So it's just a sort of thank you guys. There's a process we're following, but we heard you.
Right.
So I think that can get you pretty much where you want to be. And if there's one person who raises, the door in the back of the school was broken or something, and I'm coming up with a stupid thing, then you can expect your administration to check back with that person. So there can be communication without having an argument and then coordinating. So quickly on the Freedom of Access Act, and I won't go through all of the slides. I just want to talk about it sort of more broadly. So a lot of school boards really chase against the Freedom of Access Act because, well, on both sides, some chase because they want to talk about stuff in private so that they can talk open. Others chase because they believe in transparency and they don't want to talk about anything in private. The fact of the matter is that the Freedom of Access Act is a really, really good vehicle that weighs two real competing interests. You have on the one side the interest in the public of knowing what's going on. And that's the thing that as I said before, really promotes that confidence. But you have on the other side a need for confidentiality in certain things. Your employees have a right to confidentiality when you're talking about employment. In just the same way that you wouldn't want your employment matters put on whatever YouTube or whatever's going on there. None of your employees want that and they have the right to keep that confidential. So that has to be an executive session. It has to be. Same thing for other things like, negotiations. You can't negotiate if the other side already knows that you're going to give more. So those are the things that executive session piece of the Freedom of Access Act really is striking that balance between being transparent, which is important, but also protecting people when they have to, but only when they have to. Quickly, you've all been in and you'll be in executive session. You know that whatever happens in executive session has to remain confidential. You cannot talk about it when you go home, no matter how much your 10th grader wants to know about what you talked about. You cannot talk about it, or your neighbor or anybody else, because the law is that has to be confidential. So you have to keep it confidential. Other than that, I think it's the Freedom of Access Act is also important that you remember that all of the documents, every correspondence, every communication that you have as a board member is a public record and is subject to a Freedom of Access request for records. It's important, therefore, that you keep your email and things like that that deal with district business separate from your personal stuff, so that you don't have somebody like me pawing through your personal emails to find the public records. It's also important that you remember that because it is public, people can see it, and it's important that all of your communications as a school board member are professional, probably pretty short, because if you're communicating amongst a board, you may be having a public meeting, which is illegal. So any communication has to be kind of short and not really substantive in most cases. So let's see. I think that is pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about. Last thing, I guess I should talk a little bit about, because it's sort of a bigger issue in law now than it used to be. Social media, really hard issue. If I was king of the world, I would say nobody goes on social media ever again. It's not worth it. It's just going to give you a headache or a stomachache or something like that. But I do know that in this age, that's how a lot of people communicate with each And so a lot of school board members in Maine and in other places feel like having a social media presence is important. If that's what you choose, that's okay, but there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. The first is just the freedom of access issue. If you're dealing with school board business on social media, you remember that that's a public record. The second, though, is a little bit, and I guess we have our President Trump to thank us for some clarity in this. You may or may not remember that a few years ago, there was a lawsuit brought against him as a result of his Twitter use. So he had, I don't know if any of you know this, but he had this Twitter account. He had got to a point where he was shutting down certain viewpoints, certain progressive viewpoints. So I can't remember what the Franklin something society sued him and said, you are committing a First Amendment violation. This is your Twitter account is a public forum because you're dealing with governmental business and you are shutting up certain people based on content. It is true as a matter of First Amendment law that the government can't shut people down based on the content of what they say. So you can't tell people that they can talk about X in the village square, but they can't talk about Y. That's how the First Amendment started. So now we brought it into Twitter. And the issue for the court was, well, is somebody's private Twitter account a public forum, like the town square? And Trump was like, well, look, I said happy birthday to my wife, and this is a personal thing. Court says no. You're dealing here with the matters of the government, and so this is a public forum. And if you have made content-based decisions, then that could be a First Amendment violation. Now, for the president, that's not a huge problem because the president can't be liable for damage. For all of you, it's more of a problem because if you were making content-based decisions on social media, that could be not only a technical First Amendment violation, but actually something that can hold you up for liability and money damage. So my message there is you can have a Twitter account or a Facebook account or whatever. I don't know if TikTok would be right for a school board. Whatever you choose. But if you do, you can't be making those content-based decisions. So, questions? Answers?
Melissa, thanks.
Thank you. What if our spouse is saying stuff? Is that's not us, that's our spouse. Is that safe to say?
So, well, it's safe to say that it's not you, it is and it's your spouse, but it's not you and it's your spouse. But are you talking about, are they saying stuff on social media or?
Not
So-
about school, not about committee stuff.
So
But they may
they're
be
just,
making statements
yours-
related to school matters in general.
your spouse, let's just take an example. So your spouse posts on Facebook, we ought to paint the high school purple.
Sure.
And then there are people who hate purple and shuts them down, and there are people who like them and it brings them in. That's not a public forum. Now, if the two of you are sharing it and you're also talking about something else to buy, you want to buy a, I don't know, a tank instead of a school bus or something. And then it's true that by her shutting things down, she's not committing a First Amendment violation. but it's gonna look to somebody like you're over there, you know, telling her what to do, and that will probably get you into court. It might not make you lose, but it could get you sued. So I would be really careful about letting my spouse use at least a shared social media account to advocate a purple high school.
Melissa, thanks. So, oh, I'm sorry, Terry, did you have a question?
I just wanted to, I was actually I'm sorry, I don't know. One of the things that was helpful for us when you were saying about like, how do we know and get answers is we sat back and looked about what was the problems, what were most people complaining about, and it was not being heard. That's what it all came down to, boiled down to. They asked people. And so we were really set up a strong chain of command, being like, and let the parents know, let the students know, go to the person that is most directly causing this issue, like if it's your kid or the trauma with a teacher, try to work it out with that teacher. If you're not comfortable talking to the teacher alone, then we set up a plan. But it was like creating steps so that each step of the way, the teachers felt safe, the parent felt safe, or a guardian. And it was really a bad year. But the family went through it. It went all the way through the direct person, all the way up to the school board, the superintendent's office, and came back to the school board. In the end, they did not like the decision, but they sat there and they said, thank you for listening to us. We're not happy, we don't agree, but we'll accept it because you showed us how to do it. And once we did that with them, because they were very vocal on Facebook and everywhere else, it seemed to make a difference. It's still not easy, but being really clear with people what their process is. And I think it's different for some schools and other ones, but we say, follow the chain of command, but each step of the way, think about it, like the he said, she said thing. We figured out really quickly that we needed to have a third impartial person present in some of the negotiations or talks with that step. And it just kept building up till it got to the superintendent. They weren't happy with the superintendent, so they brought it back to the school board. But we've had many families tell us since then that they're not always happy with what happens, but they felt that they were listened to and respected. And that was just has stuck in my mind. Remember to respect them, remember to listen to them. And we don't have to, like even here, we don't have to agree with each other. But just knowing what is expected and what their course of action is. Like you said, and for you, getting that, you'll get that answer back, maybe we got it back directly from the families. The family said, oh, I went and saw this person, I didn't like it, so now I'm doing that next step that you told me. And but it's just knowing what those steps are for our schools and being really clear about them with our families. So if somebody comes to you and said, hey, so-and-so did this, I said, did you follow that chain of command? Where are you on that chain of command? And just bringing it back to that so they know they can't come to you and have you fix it, but what their steps are. And it has really been helpful for us.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to say. If you have a process, one, people like processes because that's something they can expect and they can understand. And two, if you follow it, then that shows things are working. So process, follow, bam, it's easy. Yes.
First of all, thank you. This is very helpful, Melissa, as a fairly recent school board member. Kind of building on the question about spouses and Facebook. I am a school board member and I'm also a parent. So do you have any suggestion or thoughts on how to switch from the role of a parent that may not like something going on or may like something going on and the school board and how to separate that?
So that's a really hard question. It's a question that most school board members are parents and most school board members struggle with that. I think one thing you have to do is remember, especially when you're dealing with employees, teachers, or administrators, that even though you're gonna say, I'm talking to you in my role as a parent, you are like a cool dude, so.
Maybe not.
So you've got to be sensitive about that. I mean, people are gonna see you as a school board member, even when you're acting as a parent. But I do think that when you're acting as a parent, either as a cheerleader or somebody who has it, you need to be saying, I'm speaking as Melissa's parent. So that people are, and being really, really clear about that always. Okay,
Thank you so much for
have fun.
for coming.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Bye.
Good trip.
Okay. This brings us on to reports and updates. We'll start with the superintendent's report and the discussion of school testing.
Thank you, Jessica. If it's okay, I have a couple quick updates, and I wanted to start with Pat and Eric on to. I'd first like to acknowledge last Friday, I learned of board chair, former board chair, Bell Harbor School Committee member Christy Wascarjo, her resignation. And as superintendent, I wanted to share my personal and professional thanks, gratitude for her leadership, selfless service, her unwavering advocacy and support for teachers, support staff, and as a champion for all students across all of our district schools. Over the course of my nearly 39-year career in public service and education, I've worked for and with dozens and dozens of elected officials. Christy Wascarjo was his final board member, person, and colleague you could ever have the pleasure of meeting and working with. She's a tireless advocate for public educators and understands the value and worth of not only doing the right things, but more importantly, doing things right. Christy is optimistic, friendly, outgoing, warm, courteous, and empathetic. Most importantly, she enjoys seeing people be successful and always gives credit where credit is due to others. It's disheartening for me to see someone of her experience, her caliber, her talents, and her passion resign. As someone who's worked closely with Christy for over 5 years, I know firsthand we've lost a significant leader. And I want to thank her publicly for all that she's done for our students, our staff, our schools, and our communities. Christy, thank you. Be well, and know that you'll be greatly missed. Start my report by just cautioning folks that these enrollment figures at the beginning of the year are fluid. But just to give you some context, today we're at 1,408 students across the district. And again, we update that on our website. So if people want to see the breakdown by grade and by school, you can see that thanks to Selena. And so that 1,408 includes pre-K through 12. And just as a reminder, we now have pre-K programming in Trenton and in Southwest with a collaborative program between Tremont and Southwest Harbor. To give some context, last year at this time, we were at 1,419 students. Now, I'd caution everybody because there's still students moving back and forth. It's early, but you'll get continued updates. But we do update that weekly on the website. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email or check with the principal. I certainly want to give a shout out and kudos to staff. They've worked very, very hard getting our buildings ready, making the transition to support our commitment to in-person learning and instruction. It's hard and arduous work. And I just want to give a shout out to let them know how much we appreciate that. With that, I wanted to reintroduce Eric Hahn. Eric is just here to give the board a quick overview of the things that he's been doing the last couple of months. He's going to give a really, really comprehensive look at what he's found so far on the job, not tonight, but prior to budget season. But he's here to talk about some of the things he's learned that he's been doing. And he's also here to make, or I'm here to make a recommendation that he's provided the background for on a very, very critical need with our transportation system. So Eric, if you, with your permission, is it okay if Eric says a few words? Eric, come on up. Here.
Some of you have met, some of you haven't. To give you an idea, this new position is the operations manager, which is in charge of busing and also custodials and stuff like that. So just to let you know what I've been doing is trying to understand all the busing issues and routes and stuff like that. Networking with the staff and bus routes and pertaining to anything with buses, you know, that may be issues in here and there. Analyzing or ordering of supplies for the schools and the districts, for custodians and being able to do purchasing power. Hopefully you can hear me through this map, by the way. The workings of an understanding of the district of AOS 91. That's been a tough one for me. It's been you know, trying to understand each one of the schools and stuff like that. The biggest thing I'm here is to help. Okay. Help develop relationships with all the schools, with all the principals, stuff like that. So that's what I've been working on. So in the future, now into the future, getting to the principals, I would like to be one by one, one-on-one with the principals, with the head custodians, bus drivers. Okay. I feel the custodians and the bus drivers right now need somebody to back them. There's a lot of issues that are going on that they need help with. I'll be riding the buses to understand more of the routes and different things that goes on with the busing, in the sense of the students getting on and getting off. I can understand what's going on with those issues. We're going to get a free software that the state offers, and that software I will start training next month. So this should help with the whole district, and really, from what I've seen, it's going to help the students, it's going to help the parents, it's going to help the teachers. Very, very important. Of course, it's also going to help the principals. I want to leave them out. So,
Eric, excuse me, that's transportation routing software, right?
yes, transportation routing software. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. We're also going to have training for custodians and bus drivers for legal things, you know, like maybe climbing the ladder, asbestos and stuff like that. There's certain things that we need to set up so that they have that training and the background for OSHA or whatever. So we're going to be doing that. I'm going to be doing that. Also, the projects in different schools that, you know, like right now I'm involved with the library and also the science lab for the high school. And there's another one with the Pennatic I was involved with. So we'll be going over some more of those with all the schools, just to let you know that's what's going to be going on. And some of these recommendations mostly will be probably for the year 2023. So hopefully we get some of it done this year. So at this point, I'm going to give it over to Mark so we can talk about the research that I just did with busing and stuff like that.
So just to let you folks know, Eric's been working hard since July 1st. He's visited every school, he's been to the outer islands, he's putting together lists of needs, programs, things that we need to address immediately, midterm, long-term. Be updating things related to the Sealander reports and school improvements. So that work will be ongoing. But you may be aware as a board that bus drivers are at a critical juncture nationwide, certainly in Maine and regionally. And when Derek put this data together, I was stunned. I'll pass it out. I cannot remember, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, during my time as superintendent, and I'm not talking about a collective bargaining piece, and I'm not talking about our contract with SEER. So for our transportation, as the board knows, all of our transportation is done locally through our local boards. In Bar Harbor and in Trenton, we work with SEER Transportation, and so we have a contract with them. But what we're really here to talk about tonight is all of our people who do substitute driving or extra trips. And we are at a real tough spot where it hasn't happened yet. But if we don't make some decisions and some changes, we may be in a place where we cannot offer some of those experiences or trips if we don't make some changes. And what you have here is a pay scale. And again, this is not the current collective bargaining agreement. These are not salaries for regular drivers. We are talking about substitutes or drivers that do additional trips. When you look at the matrix, RSU 25, which is Bucksport, Hancock, Lemoyne, RSU 24, which is Sumner, Hancock, oh, thanks, Josh. And then AOS 91, you can see bus drivers routes, you can see the pay for those substitute drivers and those additional trips. And then you can see the matrix, how we are well below. So what we have is, we're at a point where we're potentially losing drivers, certainly not attracting or retaining or recruiting additional drivers for trips will be very, very difficult. Eric's recommendation, and I support it, is to increase our substitute bus driver and additional bus driver pay to $21. Now, we will have to navigate that within our existing budget. The rationale for that is for us to stay in line or slightly ahead of the curve so that we can not only retain people, but we can attract people. I can tell you, Bunky was here, but the principals will tell you that we're at a really tough spot right now. And I know, and I think Eric could confirm, Bunky and others, that we're at a point that if we don't make some changes, we're going to lose these people. I don't want to see us lose them. I don't want to see us not providing the trips for our children or these rich experiences. This is really no different than when I came to the board a couple of years ago on substitute teacher pay. And again, I was looking back, I can't remember ever I've been here since 2016. I don't believe we've discussed this. I also want to make one other note that we have people who are ed techs or custodians, and they may be at a certain pay scale. The way this reads now is that I'm just going to throw out a number. If I'm an ed tech and I can drive a bus, I'm certified, and I'm making $18 an hour as an ed tech, to go drive a bus, I'm going to get $15 an hour. So we have people saying, why would I do that according to this scale? My recommendation is if we go to the $21 rate, that nobody be paid less than that if they're driving a bus. Does that make sense? So that they keep their existing hourly rate. Conversely, though, if they go back, it doesn't mean that if they were getting 21 to drive a bus, that raises it. So we would have that caveat in there. Eric, did I miss any points?
No, we got them all. What we need.
Bunky, is there anything you'd like to add? Then, thank you.
Do we need to change this 2-hour minimum as well? It looks like everybody else is offering a 2-hour minimum.
I'm going to defer to Eric on that.
I would do a 2-hour minimum. The reason why I would say recommend a 2-hour minimum is because sometimes you have people that drive during the day. So they come in at 9 o'clock to take a trip to go for an hour or hour and a half. And they're getting, right now they're getting 15. But if you bump it, I just feel for them to get up, to get here, to go there, split their day. I still think you should do a 2-hour minimum. That's my recommendation.
Again, I want to reassure the board that if we go down this road, it's our responsibility to navigate this through our existing budgets. So we really have to work closely with Nancy to make sure we keep our eye on this, how it's going. I do believe it's the right thing to do. I do believe if we don't do this, it'll have some potentially negative consequences.
I'm just wondering, are we gonna discuss column 1 or is that, are we taking that out to the regular salaries for bus drivers, or is that?
All I'm not
You're focusing on Subcommittee.
Oh, yeah.
So all I'm recommending is increasing sub-driver pay
Okay.
and trip pay at this time. Correct?
Right, correct. That's what we want to
That
do.
seems like a
So bus
priority.
drivers with groups will stay at 7.
This is sub-pay.
Oh,
This
that
is
is,
for
that
sub-pay.
is sub. all
Yeah,
of it's
all-
sub-pay.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
We're talking,
So I
we're
would
talking this
be
column.
recommending 21 in both columns. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Laura.
okay. so-
Okay, great.
Sorry, thanks for the question.
Marie? Oh, you-
Better go first, please. She's gonna end up longer than anybody.
I did, was going off of Carrie's statement, from everything I've been reading, because I talked with the bus drivers here about 4 years ago. Is the biggest problem to seem to be not just the fact of what the pay is, but that it's just the nature of driving a bus, that you have to be here at this time and this time, and it doesn't really bode well for having a job that in between that fits that. Is that any comments that you've had, or?
No, it's mostly the pay. In other words, you got a separate schools, okay? And let's say you got penalty, you got 3 drivers, 4 drivers, whatever it is. They're over there, maybe they do $20 an hour to do custodial bus driving at the time. Then Bunky calls and say, hey, can you drive for me? And they say, no, because you're only gonna pay me $15. Okay, so those are the issues that they're saying. So what I'm trying to say too is that we have a lot of, in our other school districts, that students, or I mean, bus drivers would want to drive for trips for other places. That won't do it because it's only 15.
So are we gonna try to, that this will even it out so that it'll be the same, except for my school?
Yeah.
We pay more than that. We pay more than mainland for extra trips, because we have the contract. But it's nice to see that we were in that same situation before. Our bus driver was being paid far less than the mainland bus driver, and we let them know, and through transparency. But it was all across the board. We were behind on everything. And so we brought it up to the reasonable level back then. And then now I'm seeing there's a, I would be upset. I would, if there was disparity there, we need to try to fix it somehow so that we can keep those people. Like you said, they could say, if you need to drive for another school, or we need to substitute, make it so they could get a little more.
What are the approximated collective hours that are typical in a year that are sub hours?
I don't have that information right now, Marie. I don't know. I don't know if you know the average, but
I don't know if
I
Bunky
can
is
gather
that.
that, but I do not know that.
Like, is it like typically like, oh, because it's 10 hours extra a week, or is it 40, or do you have an idea of what the collective typical hours of subs are a week?
Well, it's gonna vary because right now I have 2 people right on the fence that's waiting supposed to have tonight. They can come and drive, and we don't have to pay for those drive. They usually go on the weekend. It's only gonna be an average, that's where you go, in the Bangor area. Old Town Orno area is probably gonna average probably 4 hours a week. So I'm thinking of that being Florida, for example. Drive 5 days a week to school. It becomes, we leave at 4 o'clock, he's back in time, he can take a fall, he take football team to Maine this weekend, and turn around and go to Caribou the next day. That's all he can drive for. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
You also got your daytime trips.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of how much, I just like we talk about, we raised prices or not prices, I'm sorry, wages for substitutes in the schools, but we had an idea of like what that was gonna look like, how many subs we always needed. So I was hoping or thinking that there would be some, connection, like some ballpark that we'll typically use like 45 hours a week of like these sub drivers because it's always like after school for games or like on the weekends. I figured there'd be some ballpark, but I can understand that it would be different.
Fremont Southwest might be different. Those bus drivers, instead of taking a route, maybe someone in and take them students. The high school business, we have all sub drivers. Except on the weekend. For the most part.
Have we ever thought about, it just wouldn't help out the Harbor and Trenton because we wouldn't have our own buses, but have we ever thought about offering a stipend to the coaches or something for if you get your driver's license and you can drive, some sort of carrot?
We started that last 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, before COVID hit. Wayside.
But we're not offering enough to,
We can offer, we try to drivers, adult then, but no one.
Right, but I'm talking about the stipend itself, like if you drive to the games, if you drive to all of your away games, you get X amount. I mean,
We're gonna do the training and stuff. We only have
Right.
2 people sign up,
okay.
so there's still a couple more. That's coming up the licensure. So
Oh, Mark has something to mention.
just to tell you. So all of those pieces, Robin, Sue, that anything that we can do to incentivize them, this is something that we're recommending that we do in the here and now, but that's part of and parcel of what we're expecting Eric to do. Because this problem isn't gonna go away no matter what the board does or doesn't decide to do. And transportation is a huge issue. And I want to give a shout out because we've had a few staff members already at ed techs with teachers that have gone ahead and got the bus driver training and are doing it. And if we can get more of those folks and more coaches, but yes, I think you're right. Incentivizing it is the way to go.
I just want to clarify because I'm confused. So for non-high school regular bus drivers at the K through 8 on island schools, is the rate $21 or more? For the bus drivers so he made a comment that all high school bus drivers are subs, so they'll all be covered under $21. I'm asking is the bus drivers at all the K through 8 schools at that level, because if they're not, then by raising the sub level, we could cannibalize the drivers at the other schools because they could drive it for the high school because they could get paid.
That is for subs. It's not for a permanent driver. What's
So the
happening with
permanent,
that?
what's the rate for the permanent driver?
For the permanent driver in Penitic, I have no clue. But if you take that permanent driver and he comes up to the high school and wants to take the soccer team up to Bangor, he only gets 15.
Right, but correct me if I'm wrong, you said that all the high school drivers are subs. Right, so the morning and afternoon drivers are subs. So my question is, if the driver at Pemitic, to your point, doesn't make 21, but then by driving for the high school, they could, aren't we, by raising the price of the subs, potentially cannibalizing drivers from other schools?
No, the morning and afternoon
That
are
won't
not
happen
subs.
during the week.
They're employees of the town, of each individual school. It's the athletic stuff and the extra drives or trips for students. Those are all subs.
See, we leave a lot of times 2:15, 2 o'clock, 2:30. Those people you're referring to are still driving their lives. So it will not have an impact. They won't be taking.
High
This is
school
like a
bus
side
drivers
job.
aren't subs. High
Pardon?
school extra drivers are subs, not like you drive.
So all high school drivers aren't subs, that wasn't a correct statement.
Well,
Extracurricular.
because they drive through their town routes, but.
Got it, okay.
More like a side job. I mean, it's like a side job. If they say want to drive for, some of them want to go to Caribou or whatever, you know, they get 15 bucks.
Got it, understood.
Generally, they're not going to cannibalize to get more hours. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we should direct the superintendent to do these wage raises. Do we need to make a motion for that?
You can, I'd welcome that because that would codify it. So if
Someone like to make a motion to,
Yeah, make a motion, direct the superintendent to investigate it and bring to the board the recommendation for pay scale change for substitute bus drivers.
We already did that.
yes.
We did,
Yeah.
Well, that's what
This
this
is-
is. He already investigated. He just wants to.
so it's a motion
He
to,
wants a vote, yeah.
Put in out.
$21 or $21.
so I'll make a motion that we change the pay scale for substitute drivers to $21.
Yeah, 2 hour minimum.
And 2 hour minimum.
I second it. So I don't know who did this. You were the second, okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
So I'd like to move on with an update on pool testing, and just as a segue to that, I want to thank our nurses. Our nurses have been incredible assets. We could not be doing what we're doing without our nurses. So a shout out to them. But the nurses meet weekly with two members of our administrative team, Ian Braun, a high school dean of students, and Crystal DeGrassa. And Crystal is here, and I believe we've got Crystal Springer, a nurse from Trenton, and Tammy Underwood, a high school nurse, to fill in and answer any questions. But Crystal's just going to give us an overview on the pool testing, because she's been our resident expert for our administrative team, along with those folks I just mentioned.
So we'll take resident expert down to facilitator of the nurses meeting. And I'm going to take a piece of the standard operating procedures that the Maine Department of Education asks that all administrators and nurses are they're directed to follow. And I want to say that because there's a lot of what I'm going to talk about in pool testing that connects to quarantines and isolation, but that's really a separate conversation from tonight. I'm just going to stand out of the light. So I'm going to just highlight some of the rationale behind pool testing, and then I can answer some questions around pool testing. And we've got our expert nurses. You can actually call them expert nurses. And they'll help if there's a specific question about how a test is run, because they have to go through some very specific training, and that's really important. We're lucky in the state. I'll take slide 2, please. Our state recognized through the Department of Health and Human Services the need to keep our children in school. We're very lucky as a state that we had a department really focusing and fighting for our children to be in school. One of the best resources we have is this pool testing, because we still have individuals that either opt into vaccination or out, but also that aren't even eligible for a vaccine. And so if we did not have pool testing, we would have many students that would have to quarantine with no option to stay in school. So I just want to recognize that's a huge step that our state took, and I think it's important that we honor that it's a lot of work for our nurses, because we're asking them to do things that other states are not asking them to do, but it's really in the best benefit of our students. And the pool testing, the PCR testing, it's the most efficient way to really get a snapshot at our schools. And so we know that last year we went through a lot of drive-through testing centers, like at the hospital, and we pulled a lot into Walgreens and convenient MD. But really, we were asking all of these families to get all of these tests and bring it back to us. And we were really only able to provide just a small bit of guidance to our students and our families. And we wanted to provide a way to get a snapshot of where our schools are, because things are changing quickly. And especially with the Delta variant, there's a lot of new information that we're getting. So it's the best way to get a quick snapshot at a large group. Next slide, please. So this is just a little flow chart that's going to help you to walk through the process. And none of these are my words. None of these are my charts. I've taken everything through the SOP. So I'm just going to step back here a little bit. So at the top, you see that the pool PCR testing takes place. And what we do is we collect samples of a pool. The pools initially were going to be somewhere between the size of 5 to 25. And quickly, we realized that we were going to run out of testing if we kept those pools that large. For a couple ways down, I'll tell you why that would be impactful. To reduce our pools down now, we want to have a pool that's somewhere between about size of 7 to 10. It could still be 5, but about 10 to be in a pool. We don't identify the test tube inside of the pool, but we identify the individuals in the pool. So all of the individuals in a group are put into a tube and a PCR test is done. So that pool or batch, we now have results for, but we don't know the positive is reported if the individual inside that tube is person A, B, C, D, E. So it's just that the pool has given us a positive. So if you take that step down, it's really important to know that this is done once per week, the PCR test. And I'll show you a sample schedule in a minute. But basically, each of our schools has designed a way to get all of the people who need to participate or opt in to participating in pool testing into their pools. And some of our schools have to test on multiple days. Some of our schools can test just on one day. But again, it's once a week, a pool is PCR tested. So as you go through and the courier takes that PCR test, what's been working out really well is that between 24 and 48 hours, we're getting results. And our nurses can confirm we're closer to 24 than 48 in most cases of what we've been sending out. Of course, that could change. Obviously, we had a goal of getting all of our schools started by this week. So by the end of this week, every school should be started, and we will. Tomorrow is the last school that had to get started, will be started. So all of our schools will be doing pool testing as of tomorrow. That's really important, but it also reminds you that we're not the only ones in the state doing pool testing. And they did not all have as quick of a guide like as we did, because we wanted to make sure we got pool testing started as soon as we could. So we're gonna send out more tests and potentially it could slow down. But we're seeing right now that about 24 hours, we're getting these results. Once we get the results, we've got two pathways. You either have a positive in the pool or a negative. Best case scenario, you get a negative, you know your pool does not have a positive case inside. You resume as normal, there's no more testing for the week. If you get a positive, again, you do not have the identification of the positive, but you know that somebody in that test pool has tested positive. So we go through a second round of testing, which is usually the following day from when you receive results. So again, if you test on Monday, you won't get the results back to do what's called a Binext test until Wednesday or Thursday, because you're waiting for those results. You Binext the whole group. And the best part of both of these is the self-swab is recommended for anybody second grade and older. So it's not an invasive test. It's not the COVID test before you have a surgery that kind of goes all the way up your passage. It's really just a self-swab right on that kind of bottom layer. So students feel comfortable doing it. They feel like they're in control of it. It's a lot less scary for our students when they are the ones sticking it up inside. And it's just 5 times in each nostril. Look at them just to make sure they give me a thumbs up. I've done this now once in pool testing, so I'm not an expert there. So once we have the swab done and we get a positive, we now are going to Binext them. That's a rapid antigen test. So everybody's going to be within 15 minutes, we're going to know if there's a positive found. If there's a positive found, we start the process of contact tracing because we know we have a positive. So we know that person is going to have to go into isolation, which is recommended that they stay away from all family members. And that the rest who are considered close contacts then have to quarantine. The quarantine period is 10 days. All of that language stays the same. But we might not identify a positive. And that's where we kind of get into this, what happened? And there's not always a clear result as to what happened because we know we're learning again a lot about these tests. But you could have a test that's positive in a PCR, that's your pool. And when you Binext all of the individuals in that pool, because again, you know who's in the pool, but you don't know who's positive, you get negative results on that following day. So the state and the department recommend you test one more day after that. So a student could potentially have 3 tests in a week, 1 PCR, which is the pool, and 2 Binext. And what you're trying to find is a symptomatic person because a PCR test reads differently than a Binext test. So you're looking for someone who's symptomatic, who's then possibly spreading that. And that's what we're trying to eliminate is a spread because we don't want to get to an outbreak status. So we're trying to mitigate. Again, this is just a mitigation strategy. If we do not have a positive after 2 rounds of Binext, you stop. You don't keep Binext them every day. That's why we have pool testing. You wait till the following week. The pool typically stays the same. Sometimes you have to add in or take out because again, parents can opt in and opt out at any time. So pools could change, but they're not likely to change very much. So the pool tests again the following week. The process starts all over again, right through the chart. Next slide, please. So again, this is a sample testing schedule. I've kind of laid it out for you in this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But we know that that's in the perfect model, right? That we all only have 100 students and we test all of our students on Monday. We get our results by Wednesday in the perfect world. And then on Thursday and Friday, we can do a double Binext. It doesn't always work that way. We've got larger schools. And what we might be doing is seeing that we have a test done on Monday for 1 set of pools and Tuesday for another set of pools. So again, we're going to get results back on different days. And potentially you could have a test done on Thursday or Friday. If you have just that group that was tested once on the Binext Friday, they might have tested again Monday. So it's not going to be perfect every time, but the system is followed for all of the pools. It's a double Binext only if there's no positive found, once there's a positive found in the pool. Next slide, please. So this table has more data than you need for pool testing. And your eyes might be drawn to some of the different exemptions, but I'm going to ask you to stay with me right here for just the exemption 3 pool testing. There's lots of other areas that we can describe and talk about as the administrative team, but we know the exemption number 1 isn't possible for all because of choice and because of age. So we go to exemption 2. We know not everybody has had COVID, but they might have had COVID in the last 90 days. they have a different exemption. We go to exemption 3 and you get to pool testing. You can see here that we still have to follow the CDC's guidance. We can only keep children in school. We cannot keep them out of quarantine in the community. So a child who is considered a close contact, but is an active participant in pool testing can remain in school. They can continue their learning, but they are still required by CDC guidance to quarantine outside of school. We're not going to go home with these children. We don't know what they're doing, and we know that, but we're not going to tell you that you shouldn't still quarantine, that you shouldn't still follow all the mitigation strategies. But we're going to tell you that we can have you continue your learning because of the testing that is done weekly, to ensure that if you are going to test positive, we're going to catch it. And it's going to be in a timely manner. So it's important to know that you do not have to quarantine from your class, and you do not have to quarantine from school-related sports or activities. That's if you're in pool testing. If you are not in pool testing, you do not get to come to school, do not get to play sports. You're in a complete community quarantine. So the advantage here really is that we can keep our students engaged in in-class learning. And so we want to advocate for pool testing for those who can't, again, be vaccinated or who haven't had COVID. And we have this extra layer that allows us to really make sure we can continuously monitor our students and periodically, weekly, check them for COVID to help make sure we're not going to have a spread. We've got a snapshot of our school. And again, the biggest message is our children are learning in school. Couple caveats down here just for the exemptions. Again, I think it'll be important for further conversations about quarantines and isolations. But again, it's just really important here that you also see that if you are considered a close contact and you're in pool testing, you'll also receive the phone call. You'll also receive the letter. It will be clear that we're not going to just say, well, this person's in pool testing, so we don't need to tell them anything. We're still going to ask them to practice their mitigation strategies. We're going to ask them to symptom monitor. Because again, you don't have to quarantine from school or from sports, but if you're symptomatic, you always do. So that trumps it. So if I am considered a close contact, but I'm in pool testing, and all of a sudden I've got a sore throat or a runny nose, I don't get to say, but I'm in pool testing, I get to come to school. I still have to stay home because I'm symptomatic. Any questions about this so far? I'm almost done.
Susan, and then quick, because I've been asked, how are the pools chosen? Is it at random, like the pool members?
So the best way that I've seen, please correct me if I'm wrong, is you want to think about their cohorts and their pods they're currently in. So if I have a first grade classroom, I'm going to try to pool them together because I'm going to try to identify them as a group. But because our sizes have come down, I might have 2 pools in a first grade classroom. And I would put my classroom teacher in with that pool because again, if a pool tests positive and you do have to find those cases, you want the teacher to also be able to know that it's their group of students. And then typically throughout the school, you're going to put your bus drivers in, your specialists in, and you're going to find places that make sense, not just because of who they work with, but because of pool sizes. But we do want to try to keep it in cohorts and pods. So when you identify that positive in that pool and you do the bionex testing, it's also a little bit quicker to get into that contact tracing, which would be the next step of a positive. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, so my question kind of refers back to the other slide when you were going through positives and negatives. Can you talk a little bit about false positives and how often if we are seeing any of them, or what kind of protocol we have in place for false positives?
Sure, I'll give you a couple examples, but then by all means, jump in. So we know that in the first 90 days after you've had COVID, they don't recommend you to get tested because you could get tested and be reported positive, especially on a PCR, because you still have the viral. And so if you are tested in a pool, we know that there are asymptomatic individuals. So we could have a student in a pool or an adult in the pool who tests positive on the PCR, but they didn't know they had COVID within the last 90 days. So in that case, are they still going to be contagious? Are they still spreading? Are they going to test positive on a binax? Probably not. So it's not necessarily a false positive. It's a false positive to the fact that they are symptomatic or they're transmitting them to others. But that is one example of how somebody could test positive in a pool, but it's because they've had COVID in the last 90 days. And again, it could be known or it could be unknown. But we don't want to be testing those people regularly because, again, that could lead to a false positive. Another example, and if you want to jump into any, you might have a Binax test done. And we learned last year that a Binax test really tests for symptomatic people the best. Because if you have symptoms, the Binax is your best way to catch that. PCR is more of a long term, right? So I could test positive on a Binax. And what we learned last year was after a Binax, it's a good idea to have a PCR, the follow-up test, to make sure that you're kind of confirming that you're positive. It doesn't mean that you're not positive because you only test on a Binax, but it's showing that there's enough going on that you could be symptomatic, you could be transmitting. But again, you could test positive on a Binax, then go within 24 or 48 hours and test negative on a PCR. We're left with a lot of questions, but it could go either way. And I don't think we know, even as a nation, how to answer all of those false positives or false negatives. But I think that's why this pool testing does a good job of starting with a PCR and then moving to a Binax to kind of identify, again, you're looking for that transmission as a mitigation strategy. Any other examples or more information?
I will just say right now, only about 1% of pool tests are coming back positive. And of those, in almost every case, they are identifying a positive person in the pool. We're very early on, so like Crystal said, it's possible as we get started, we might find some of those people who maybe had COVID, maybe over the summer, didn't realize it. So that might pop positive on a test, but we don't expect very many of those.
I'm just curious from in a timing thing, like from what I have kept up with, this new variant is so much more contagious. And if you're doing the pool testing, and everyone's still together, and then it's like 48 hours before you do the next test when you realize there was a positive. Isn't that like a pretty nice moment for everybody to share the virus?
I think the best way to answer that is we're trusting our mitigation strategies. I think that,
With the mask.
you know, we went to universal masking for the reason that we believe that universal masking will help us. We discussed the 6 foot versus a 3 foot distancing, and we agreed that even though the state requires 3 feet at all possible, we're going to go 6 feet. I think that it's about that modeling we're doing with our mitigation strategies, that we have to have some faith or some trust that what we're doing is working. The hand washing, the sanitizing, our custodians are doing an amazing job. Our bus drivers are cleaning the buses. You know, our teachers are wiping down tables, even though we know it's not really a surface virus, right? They're still continuing to do all the things that they learned about any kind of virus and transmission. So, I mean, I think there has to be a little bit of trust. It's a great question. I mean, you could potentially have a positive, and then yes, they aren't going to get identified within that time period, but it's much more likely that as a school who's participating in pool testing, we'll find more positives earlier than we would if we asked each family to monitor their child. I mean, I've got 2 children, and if my daughter starts to have like a little fever, she's 5, I'm going to ask myself, is she cutting teeth? Right? Because she's still growing in her teeth, and that's a typical thing that I might ask. And I might monitor it. I would definitely keep her home. But would I get her COVID tested that night because she's got a mild fever? I might not.
Yeah.
Right? But again, we're not asking parents to make those hard decisions on, do I get a COVID test or do I not? I'm going to just enroll my child in pool testing, and I'm going to know if there's something I might have missed. Because we all try to do our best, right? Especially as parents. And I think it gives them back a little bit that we know they're doing their very best of using their parenting skills to get them tested. But it's resources, it costs money, right? And we're asking a lot of our families to get tested every time their children are symptomatic. So it's not really a full answer, but I think that's a good rationale for it.
So
Thank you.
another thing about that that's great is this is built off of, I don't know if everybody remembers the chart where they're most infectious in that 5 to 7 day window. So that's why this is built the way that it is. Not only are you testing everybody weekly, but then you're following up 2 days afterwards, or potentially 48 hours afterwards to make sure that you're catching any positives. But the other great thing about pool testing is when you pool and test, so you have all those different people's viral loads,
question about that. You mentioned the threshold. Is there a cycle threshold that you guys are using for that?
Yeah, so I believe that the cycle threshold is set at 37, which is just if in an individual that would be considered sneaky positive. So it's just above jump, but in a pool test, that's actually very reliable and accurate in finding a positive.
I appreciate the question. Just going forward, if we can keep the questions to the board members, that it's not a public comment moment.
Thanks for letting me slip one in anyways.
Not as bad.
John, do you have a-
No.
Next slide. So again, this just reiterates, and I think it's super important for us to state again, that the CDC guidelines have not changed. And just because we're doing pool testing, that does not get you out of quarantine. And that's going to be confusing. You might be asked that as board members. I know we're definitely going to be asked that as administrators. Just because we allow them to come to school doesn't mean we encourage them to be out in the community unmasked, transmitting to other groups, because potentially they could become a positive. So again, we're trying to keep it as isolated as we can, but keep learning at the front and make sure that kids are in school as best we can. And then I think that's our next slide is I think our final, which is just our email addresses. I know you'll have questions. We'll probably have lots of questions. Again, a lot of this relates to quarantine and isolations and other questions you'll get about academic learning. You're going to get more of that tonight, but if you have a specific question about pool testing, feel free to reach out to us. Your building nurses are amazing. They know all about the pool testing. They've all been trained. You don't have to just reach out to us. If you were to contact your building nurse, they could answer all of your questions as well. Any one of them could do this presentation. So please feel free to go to your building nurses because they really are the experts on this.
Crystal, again, I want to just give a shout out to you and Ian and all the nurses for the work you guys are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Before we proceed on, because I know it's getting late, I think we're going to postpone the high school meeting, is that right? Susan? Yeah, just so. Well, send, yeah. Oh, so right. Yes, and while we're on the topic, also under the discussion item about the equity and excellence, just because it's getting so late and this later executive session may take some time, we're gonna postpone that discussion item about equity and excellence to the October.
I unfortunately have to leave because I'm going back by boat and we can only stay until like 7:45.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. No, I didn't have anything else. That was a somewhat related note. The directors of teaching and learning have some follow-up pieces that I think I answer some questions about quarantine versus non-quarantine teaching and learning. So with your permission, we'll transition to them.
So are you in charge of the screen or should I do that?
Do you want to?
If you would just pull it up,
Yep.
yeah, I was trying to figure out who was running that. It's the link on the agenda under directions of people learning. I can do it too if you want.
Yeah, I'm just getting off.
Okay. Well, I had cut everything because I was looking at my colleagues that I have such allegiance to because the high school always goes after AOS 91. And I'm going to still keep it short because I still think we have quite a few items to keep moving through. But
Yeah, you can get on.
oh, okay, so we can. Crystal's presentation is a great segue to our report because we're going to talk about what teaching and learning looks like if someone is in quarantine. It's really very similar to what we did all year last year, but we're not running the virtual academy obviously this year, so the document has changed somewhat. It is attached in the agenda that I'm just gonna pull it up in case you folks haven't had a chance to look at it yet. Got a new laptop, so I'm not sure I can log in. I'm central office now. Josh, can you help me with that? Okay, thanks. You know what, I'm not gonna read it.
I'm not gonna read it to you, I'm just gonna paraphrase from it. So if everybody could just refer to it. I just thought it might be helpful to just have it up for those of us who bring their classes. There, is that better? Okay. I thought Melissa, you actually queued this up very well, along with Crystal, and that she said, you like processes, right? And they want you to follow them. So rest assured, we have a process, as Rhonda mentioned, it's not terribly different from the processes we went to successfully execute last year. So in looking at this, some things that I would bring to your attention is that kids are going to continue to learn. We have a plan. And I think there will be some confusion for some. If they were fully virtual, they would just expect kind of the fully virtual option, for instance, or if they were hybrid before, they might immediately expect hybrid. But that's not necessarily the case. So the reason being, we've become very technologically savvy, and we're really proud of that. And we think we have more to offer our students because of it. But in not all instances, it may not be appropriate. Every subject is different. Physical education is very different than English class. So, you know, a hybrid learning experience in your physical education class just doesn't make sense. Every classroom is different, and a teacher assesses sort of who the kids are in their class, you know, who is in front of them, and then modifies routines based on students' needs. So they may push some of the technological routines early, or they may save it for a little later. And depending upon where kids are in relationship to that, if the routines aren't established, they're not going to say to the kids, okay, we want you to we're going to have you we're going to teach you a technological routine while you're home on quarantine on your own. They wouldn't do that. They'd create an alternative learning plan. And really, it's perfectly fine. There's many different ways to reach the learning objectives. The teachers know that. That's what they're skilled in doing. We're giving them some discretion on deciding what is the best way to keep the learning going while the kids are at home. And then when they return to school, we have a process. It's called response to intervention. Some of you may be new to the board, but basically that's a way for us to measure if kids are not meeting their learning targets, what are we doing about it? And we look at data as a part of that. And upon their return to school, we'll be giving a special eye to those students to make sure, okay, how did they progress with their learning? Do they need additional supports? If so, great, we'll put them in play so that we can address any learning loss if that were to happen. So we feel pretty confident in providing some flexibility, some freedom within this form that we can meet students' needs. We are going to leverage our technology when we can, so it will be common practice too for kids to go into Google Meet, but again, when appropriate. So we've got some discretion there. If you look here, there's just a process of different people's responsibilities between the school, parent, student, and teacher, and staff. Another item to emphasize is we are going to provide food. So I know that's we have some food insecurity issues, and we are certainly going to continue to support that process. That was very important in our work last year, and we're going to continue to do that upon request. Anything else I should highlight? Any questions?
I think just to add that this was something that both Julie, Rhonda, and the principals spent a lot of time in, and it's not a fait accompli. We'll continue to review it. If there's any feedback from parents, from board members, it's something that will be part of our discussions on an ongoing basis as we need to evaluate it.
Yeah, and we could use your help in supporting a 2-day turnaround because, you know, when we get the results of the testing, teachers are already in session and they might need, you know, time to gather the materials and organize things. So we're asking for 2 school days before kids receive their learning plans.
Have you deployed this plan?
Almost.
Fair question. I guess maybe look to the principals. They've been working day and night, and the answer is yes. Yeah, I see thumbs up over there. They're ready to go.
And it's already happened.
Yeah.
To varying degrees.
And you're asking for 2 days, or are you're just telling us you're asking for
we're-
teachers, or do you want us
We need
to?
your support in communicating that. I know people get anxious when their kids, they don't want them to be home and they miss so much and it's really tender. And so we're just trying to balance that with our realities too and making sure we're responsive and we think 2 school days is fair.
Is that something we need to act on?
But I think, as I said, reinforcing that, or unless the board is adverse to that, knowing that we have that support is really important.
Oh, I'm just asking, do we need to act on that, or you just want us to say, you got it?
I think just support the community.
Yeah, oh yeah, I don't think we're looking for action. This is
And I mean, language maybe that says as quickly as possible, but not more than 2 school days would maybe be more appropriate and give the sense of urgency to the community that we're doing as quickly as possible.
I'll bring that feedback to the team. They're out here. We can talk about it. Thank you. No, that was our only item for today. I mean, I could just briefly, we had a great opening of school. We've been assessing that feedback. We are planning next year's opening days already. And we've got traffic, exactly. And, the ongoing opportunities for professional learning and leading better, supporting the work all year long. So we've been busy kind of launching that piece. And, our focal points have been equity, responsive intervention, and onboarding new teachers. There's a lot of new teachers and getting them up to speed.
And local boards have asked, and Julie and Rhonda and Eric and others will be visiting local boards to do presentations and engage.
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
You mentioned onboarding new teachers. How many new teachers do we have in the district, and are there still any openings that need to be filled?
Not every new teacher is getting a mentor.
Yeah. It's a 2-grade spread of the island, I think it's north of 20. I'm counting, but I'll get you the total number, but these last 2 weeks have been tumultuous. So the number keeps shifting.
Do we have
I know
roles, though,
right
that
now the
still need to be
principals will
filled?
tell you, teaching positions, good to go largely. It's, well, special education and ed techs are really at a premium. So special education positions and ed techs is where we're really hurting. Yes, guys?
Okay, I think that brings us to subcommittee updates. So the first subcommittee update is the superintendent search committee, and I can report on that briefly to say that we met recently with Eileen King, those of Susan and Ryan. What's that?
Yeah.
And there's the survey about, the survey's prepared to go out tomorrow, I believe. And I really want us to ask each board member to please also complete the survey, because that it can be unfortunate that, if you're in the community with a board who knows, has a lot of information about this, hasn't weighed in on the survey. And that'll be followed by listening sessions, which are shortly to occur. And so we'll have more to report at the next meeting, but I think that process is going along well. I don't know, if nothing to add.
We covered the survey indicates an option to be a part of the listening sessions. If you're not in one of the cohorts, it's already
Teachers, staff.
Yeah.
Yes, but if there were, say, many students who envisioned that they wanted to have a listening session, then there would be one offered for students or any constituency who showed a real interest.
Our goal should be to share it far and wide and have as many people take it.
Marie, would you like to speak about the middle school planning committee?
Yeah,
So we have our first meeting on Thursday, September 23rd. We worked really hard to make sure that we started with a big picture sort of matrix for how to fill this committee as equitably with equal representation from each community. That was one of the goals for this one, which is sometimes not how we kind of, sometimes we're just like, oh my God, anybody who wants to be in this committee, please come help us. But we felt it was really important for this phase two to make sure all the communities were represented equally as possible, so that we had folks from, Pematic and folks Southwest and folks in MDF, so it wasn't in any way imbalanced. And I think we've done a really good job at that. So I think it will be, we'll be able to really hear the needs of each community as we move forward in this next step. I think we'll have a lot more, Jessica's co-chairing this, we'll have a lot more information clearly after this first meeting, but it's a big group of people in order to be equitable. So you know how that works. Sometimes more people, more chefs in the kitchen, sometimes things go slower, but I'm feeling really good about it. We've had folks that, weren't on the first committee. We've had folks that were on the first committee. We have parents, we have school counselor, we have principals. We have a really nice slice, I think, of our member schools. And I think because of that, it's going to make it even stronger and hopefully, able to prepare something for thinking on to phase 3 and phase 4, what that looks like. So that sounds good. Yeah, we'll let you know more at the next meeting after September 23rd.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any questions? Okay. I'm ready to do it. There, Todd, do you want?
No, go ahead.
So Todd and I met last week to kind of go through all of the names that have been discussed at our earlier meeting in the summer, names that came from administrators. And we were poised to kind of send everything out to the school board members, asking them to reach out to other people. And then the events of Friday happened, and that kind of derailed us. So our hope is to set up a meeting in the end of this week, beginning of next week with the committee, so that we can have a little bit further conversations about what next steps are. That's where we're at.
Questions for Ingrid and Todd?
No, I have just something else to say.
Oh, okay.
It's not really a committee report, but I sit as a representative for the AOS on the HCTC committee. And I didn't bring my notes tonight, but it just got me thinking that I would like to regularly be on the agenda so that you all can know what we talk about and what the triumphs and tribulations of HCTC are. And I'd like to have it be more of a conversation frequently so that people are thinking about it.
Would that go in the AOS or the high school?
I might,
Yeah.
I might recommend that you put that as a regular update as part of the high school
Oh, I'm
agenda.
sorry.
No, but if the board chooses to do it at AOS, but I do think it's important to have that as a standing item. Yeah, I think it would be more appropriate if that's what the board wanted to do it as part of the high school agenda.
Okay. I wouldn't mind some of the younger, it's like 8th graders knowing a lot about it too, though. So just my 2 cents.
Well, I was just going to add that there's a lot of work to create a middle high school transition, so I do think it could be relevant discussion, particularly if we're talking about the school.
Okay. So we tabled our discussion item about equity and excellence. But I encourage people to, if you haven't read the statement, to please read it, and if you have thoughts, feel free to, take note of them and come prepared to it, so we can hopefully be really ready to dive into this at our next meeting. That brings us on to action items about computer device lease agreements. Do you want to
Yes. I'll give you an overview. Nancy's here, so if there are any questions about numbers, and Josh is here to talk about only an overview of this thing. But essentially, I think I'll start off by saying this is a request for the board to consolidate our MLTI applications. And the analogy I'll give you is when we do the federal grants and we take those motions to allow the superintendent to have, usually we do Bar Harbor as the fiscal agent, and we put everything under one house. This is in fact a good thing that we're asking, or we believe it's a good thing. It's going to save a lot of people a lot of work. So what we're asking the board to do is to allow us to sign and execute an MLTI lease purchase agreement for these devices. These devices would be encompassing, Josh, you're listening, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so correct me if I misspeak. These would be all of the schools that make up the AOS, and this would include both our student and staff assets, correct, Josh?
That we purchased. Frenchboro is not included in this because Frenchboro will not participate in the lease because the number of devices they purchased was too small, so for the
Correct.
lease, so.
So the only
the other
difference
schools.
here, doing it at the AOS, is that if the board chooses not to go down this road, that's fine, that's the board's prerogative. It'll cause a lot of paperwork, we'll have to go back, and then our only alternative would be to go out independently and do the same numbers and the same requests at each local board. So this is a consolidated application that allows us to submit it as a singular entity, but does not change any of the financial or the fiscal parameters of what each local board would approve for their technology budget. Did I say that accurately?
Yes, and this actually was how, when I spoke with the folks at Apple Financial Services, this is how they recommended to do it, to try to do it as a AOS in one application.
So what I would, there is a recommended motion, but I'd like to amend that just to, for your consideration, where it says to authorize the 4-year lease, to authorize the superintendent of schools to sign and execute a 4-year lease. And the rest of it is stated. And so I, for both 1 and 2, that would allow your superintendent with your permission to sign it. Put it in there.
I move to authorize the superintendent to sign and execute the 4-year lease from 2021 to 2025 for MLTI devices for all NBI RSS AOS 91 K-8 schools except Frenchboro, not to exceed $238,330.50. Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to do it. Okay, and I authorize, and I move that we authorize the superintendent to sign and execute the 4-year lease from 2021 to 2025 for computer devices from Mount Desert Island High School, not to exceed $639,275.
Any discussion?
I have a question. I just need some clarification about Frenchboro. So they're excluded from this lease, but if they were part of this lease, I understand it might not be for this one, but in general, if we start consolidating the leases for all of the computers in the K-8 and in the high school, wouldn't that make it so they, even though they only have 2 computers or whatever the low number is that they have that can't work for the lease, would it make it so that Frenchboro could be a part of this lease with only 2 computers? Because the entity and the numbers, I assume if we're going into a lease agreement as the AOS K-8 schools, which would make it up 700 computers versus 2 computers, that would allow smaller schools that may not be able to have an individual lease to have that lease. Is that a correct assumption?
Possibly. The way they did this lease, there was a master lease, which is at the AOS level, which is what we're asking to do. And then there are schedules for each school. And the way they explained it to me was the number that they needed was a minimum, I think, of like 5 devices to order in order to be able to lease those, because they did them as separate orders. That was the way that the DOE had approached it too, so.
So it won't help small schools still.
It doesn't
it's
change how
5.
much it would have been either way, if that makes sense. It doesn't make it more expensive for them, but it doesn't make it cheaper for them either.
Right, so it won't make it cheaper for small schools that fall under the
Right.
threshold with this. That doesn't help that at all.
Right, not with this particular, the way they have this set up, no. And that was, some of this is a change that the Department of Education made with how they did MLTI this time around, which is very different than the way it's been done for the last 20 years. And so we've had to figure this out as we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have 2 quick things. One is I'm curious about what this means where it says that the 2 schools ordered more than were eligible for reimbursement. And the other is, do we have a number on how much we're paying per computer in this lease program?
Yes, so the computers were, if I remember correctly, $8.99 per device. And then on top of that was a case and a license for JAMP, which is our mobile device management, and Apple Care licensing, which is the warranty. So total, I think it was right around a little over $1,000 per device. This reimbursement, and the reason that says that some schools ordered had devices that were ineligible for the reimbursement. The eligibility rules for MLTI for this time around are 7th and 8th grade. And then for the following year, 7th and 8th grade student and staff devices, they took the number, by the way, from spring enrollment. And I'll get back to that in a moment because that's going to play into this as well. But so those are 7th and 8th grade devices according to spring enrollments for our schools, for students and staff. Those are the eligible devices. We had the opportunity to order additional devices beyond that number of eligible devices at the same price, which is a discounted price than you normally could purchase them. It's a negotiated price for the program. So that's why it says that they ordered additional ones. So though they had a certain number of devices that were not eligible for that reimbursement, the reimbursement is $459 per device as a one-time reimbursement for this year only. And I've submitted all the paperwork we need to do for that, so we're just waiting for the reimbursement to be processed and sent.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or should we-
If I might too, it's important to understand that we may be coming back to you for a second lease. At the end of this month, the end of September, there's a process that is opening up to catch up between the difference of what our spring enrollment was and what our fall enrollment was. So we have to look at those numbers to see where that's going to end up once that process opens, I think September 28th.
But that doesn't change.
It does
this
not
charge.
change
This
this.
is just to address
Correct.
any gaps, if there are any.
Correct. It would not change these numbers. It just would be if any additional devices due to change in them.
all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, is there any other business?
No, only that we are going to announce a policy committee meeting date coming up here at the end of the month, because I know you're going to talk about that coming up, and I wanted to let people know it's in the keywords, trying to network people's dates. So policy committee will be announced this week.
Okay, in the future agenda items, we'll have the board commitment to excellence, the second reading of the revisions to the policy about public participation at board meetings. Brian Ryan, do you want to raise like your email to me at this point?
Yeah. So immediately after Friday and the news that came out, I was getting phone calls and it was pretty instantaneous regarding we have pool testing in place, but we got masking in place, but whether or not we're going to be considering our board to do mandates on vaccinations. I don't know if that was discussed at the last August meeting that I missed, unfortunately. And so I put it as a future, I asked for it to be a future agenda item. I would think that some of the things that we would want to have as part of that would be a good understanding of what kind of authority we have. Sounds like from our earlier presentation that it is part of our authorities, it is part of our responsibilities. And then I guess further information about kind of where we are as individual schools and as an AOS in total in terms of the level of vaccination rates. I think that information could be given to us without divulging any personal information, so we can have a better discussion about it. And I also thought that we could potentially have somebody from the task force, potentially Dr. Krevins, be here to help walk through the discussion that we have when we talk about the possibility.
Okay, our next meeting will be October 18th, on Monday at 5:30. I assume how will be 5:30. But means that it's now time for us to go into executive session to discuss their pursuant to 1 MRSA 405, section 6D, contract negotiations.
I can make a motion. I move to an executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056D contract negotiations.